So, welcome everybody. Dylan here over at the Caden Academy. And as you know, I've taken some time to produce a few of these, what I'm calling lecture series. And maybe they're mini lectures, right? They're not long format lectures, but to me, they're important because a lot of times we discuss topics that, we just want to try to introduce maybe some new ideas or some old concepts um, to help us kind of rethink and recalibrate about so many topics in society today. And one of the things that I had written some notes on um, is just a different way. We live in a time today where, and this ebbs and flows throughout the economy throughout history. There's good times, there's middle ground times, and there's hard times. And, as a date of this recording, it's 2025, much of the world is experiencing very difficult economic times. And I happen to live actually in a community where it's, for the most part, it's kind of I wouldn't say tourist type of community, but it is in a sense. There's resorts, big influx of tourism in the spring and summer and fall months, and then the vast majority of people leave for the winter months as well. And with that brings a lot of jobs that support that, but there are also jobs that um, don't support the high cost of living. And oftentimes I see so many people make posts about how they're having to work 2 jobs, 3 jobs, come at home, lay their head on the pillow and just cry, and they're trying to support their families and their kids. And a lot of people are going at it alone, single. The cost of living all across the country, especially where we're at, but much of the nation is through the roof. I mean, a single person, it's almost impossible mathematically to try to live alone, let alone with children or other people to support. And it breaks my heart to see that. And oftentimes I see people just doing what maybe we were raised to do in this culture, but to bite the bullet, the proverbial bullet, and just grind more and work harder and get a 3rd job or a 4th job and just keep going and going and going and going. But I produced this audio because I want to just provoke some different thought. Oftentimes they say history repeats itself, but especially in our modern generation, I think we've lost the idea of how humans have lived for centuries in communal settings, in small tribe settings. And there's been a divide greater and greater, especially in the United States, to keep people separated, to continue to embody this ideal of individualism. And I want to just share some notes here in a moment and read them to you that I just say keep an open mind and consider there are solutions. And they may not be what we're accustomed to in modern society and culture today, but there are solutions that exist, and what I'm going to discuss is just one, but it's just something to consider. And so I'm going to get into it here in a moment, and feel free to engage in the conversation. Put your thoughts on this topic in the comments. DM me directly, share, engage. And I hope that this just, I guess let me say this, in hard times, and really all the time, I encourage people to try to brainstorm and think outside the box. There is always a solution, and sometimes it requires a recalibration of a forgotten time or a forgotten art that has been lost in modern society today. And so, keep an open mind. I'm going to discuss the concept of, well, what did I title this thing? Let's see here. I titled this lecture today, Why We Can't Do It Alone, Remembering the Forgotten Wisdom of Community. And again, feel free to share in this conversation, this dialogue, in the comments. For much of human history, survival was never an individual pursuit. It was a collective rhythm. Families, neighbors, villages, tribes moving together in the dance of life. You see, for thousands of years, the idea of doing it all yourself would have seemed absolutely absurd. Could you imagine 500 years ago, right? Did people do it? Sure. But, you know, doing it with other people made a lot more sense. A single person trying to gather food, raise children, protect a home, and carry the full weight of life alone would have been nearly impossible for most people, for most of humanity. Yet, in our modern culture, in particular here in America, this is exactly the story we are told. That strength means independence. That dignity means shouldering the whole burden yourself, and that you cannot do it alone. That you cannot do it all and that you have somehow failed. But I wonder, is this really strength? Or is this exhaustion masquerading as pride? The myth of independence. Our culture celebrates the so-called self-made individual, the hero who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, the pioneer who tamed the frontier alone, the worker who, against all odds, carved out a living with sheer grit and determination. But if we pause and look closely, this story is full of holes. Even the lone pioneer relied on a horse, on tools, on land cleared by others, on neighbors in times of need. The self-made person always leaned on unseen webs of support. Still, this myth persists. And so people today sit at kitchen tables late at night, bills stacked high, heads heavy, hearts heavy, wondering why they cannot make the math work. The rent is too high, the paycheck is too small, childcare devours what little is left, gas, groceries, insurance, they multiply like vines, choking what remains. And yet, because of the story we've inherited, many feel they must suffer silently. That to ask for help, to share, to live with others is somehow shameful or a sign of weakness. What a tragic misunderstanding. If we look back, and we don't have to go back very far, we find something very different. Even 100, 150 years ago. For most of human history, people survived and even thrived by living together. Extended families under one roof. Neighbors who shared gardens and harvest. Villages where children belonged, not just to one household, but the whole. Marriage itself as an institution was often less about romance and more about survival. A bond of families pooling labor, land, and resources. Community gardens weren't hobbies, they were lifelines. Trade wasn't an exotic marketplace, it was simply the way life functioned. And while modern culture often paints this past as primitive or inconvenient, in many ways is profoundly wise. People have had fewer possessions. People may have fewer possessions, but they carried less stress. They may have lacked wealth as we measure it today, but they possessed wealth in relationships, in shared burdens, and in belonging. And the fascinating thing is, much of the world still lives this way. In parts of Africa, Asia, South America, entire communities thrive, not by going at it alone, but by pooling everything. One family raises chickens, another grows beans, and another sews clothes, and together they have abundance. It's only here in the West that we seem to think isolation equals success. This is a modern crisis, and now the cracks in that illusion are widening. We see it in places like our own community, where the math simply does not add up. Jobs pay a fraction of what life demands. Housing costs are unlivable. Childcare often costs more than a person earns. People work 2 jobs, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, and still feel as though they are drowning. And beneath it all is this gnawing belief that they must do it all themselves. Otherwise, they've somehow failed. No wonder stress levels are exploding. No wonder health is collapsing. No wonder so many sit quietly in despair, barely clinging. It's not that they are weak, it's that the system and the story they've been told is impossible. I invite all those who are listening to remember. And so I wonder, what if the problem is not just math, but myth? What if we've been trying to solve an impossible equation by adding more stress, more hours, more jobs, when the answer lies not in more, but maybe in togetherness? What if we remembered the forgotten way? Imagine a handful of families sharing a large home. Suddenly, rent is cut in half or more. Utilities become manageable. Someone always has eyes on children. Meals are cooked and shared, lightening the load for everyone. Or even imagine a micro community, a small circle of houses with a shared communal space, where neighbors have agreed to share resources, one garden, child rotation, one tool shed, one laundry room. Not everyone carrying everything, but each carrying something for all. This is not utopia. This is not some hippie compound that I'm trying to discuss here. It's simply remembering what humans have always done. And it's not about the loss of freedom. In fact, it may be the only way to reclaim it. Because freedom is not lying awake at night under the crushing weight of bills. Freedom is having enough peace of mind to breathe, to rest, to live, to enjoy and explore life the way it was designed to be. The good news is at any time, you can reinvent the system. You can reinvent your life. You don't have to play the game that everyone else plays. You're in control. Consider a change in belief. Of course, for many, this idea is uncomfortable, and it asks us to loosen the grip on a cultural story we've been told all our lives. We have been trained to equate independence with success, to believe that to lean on others is weakness, to think that if we cannot make it alone, we do not deserve to make it at all. But this belief is the very thing that keeps so many trapped. In truth, independence is an illusion. Everything in life is interdependent. You and I cannot breathe without the trees. The trees cannot grow without the sun. The sun cannot shine without the galaxy it belongs to. And so it is with us alone, we collapse. But together, we stand. I'll leave you with this. So perhaps the challenge of our time is not simply to earn more, or work harder, or stretch ourselves thinner, but perhaps the challenge is to simply remember. To remember that human beings were never designed to survive in isolation. To remember that sharing is not weakness, but wisdom. To remember that belonging is not optional, but essential. And so I leave you with a question, one worth sitting with. What kind of life could you have if you no longer had to do it all alone? What kind of community could we build if we dared, even in small ways, to live once again together? Just some thoughts for everybody to consider. I would love to hear an engaging conversation. Thank you so much for tuning in. And feel free to share your thoughts on this topic in comments and build a conversation around this. Till next time, talk to you all soon.